All right, continuing on with Ecology Part 2, or starting Ecology Part 2, continuing from Part 1. We left off talking about food chains and food webs. And now we're going to take a look at what goes into those next. We briefly talked about trophic levels. We're going to take a look at what those trophic levels are and what happens to the majority of the energy that is eaten by each organism. So, an ecological pyramid shows the relationship between the amounts of energy or matter contained within each trophic level of the food web or food chain and what happens to most of that energy in each food web, in each ecological pyramid. Most of that energy is lost, which we'll talk about. So in an energy pyramid, only 10% of the energy available within one trophic level is transferred to the organisms in the next trophic level. Now, what that means is 90% of what you eat is lost. Only 10% of that goes into making new tissue. And that 10% is an average over all the trophic levels. Technically, the primary consumers who are eating the producers are getting more energy into their bodies. They're not losing as much. And the organisms at the very top of the food chain are actually losing more of that energy and getting less into its tissues. So that 10% is an average over all of the trophic levels. So here we go. Plants are the ones who are getting that energy from the sun, so they don't lose any. They are making all those tissues. They are producing those sugars. And the herbivores that eat that energy they get, but only 10% of it goes into tissues. The rest of it is lost. 90% is lost as heat energy. There we go. You're going to hear me say that a lot. Now, these next organisms, secondary consumers, they eat the herbivores, but notice there is less secondary consumers than primary consumers, and there's less primary consumers than there are producers. And the reason is because there's less available energy. And of course, only 10% of the energy that they consume goes into making new tissues, and 90% is lost as heat. So the tertiary consumers have even less energy available, so there's less of them. They're also usually larger, by the way. And again, 90% is lost as heat energy. Now, where is that heat energy, you're asking probably? Basically, it's all of the chemical reactions that you are doing in your body. The billions of chemical reactions that are going on all take energy. Now, they also help to maintain your body temperature, and they help to do a whole bunch of work to make sure to make new hormones and things like that, to make sure everything is running properly. All of that takes energy. And so what you eat, 90% of it is lost in all of those chemical reactions. Only 10% of it goes into repairing, rebuilding, growing, etc. Now, biomass pyramids is another way to look at what we were just talking about. We were looking at the energy portion, but we can look at the total biomass available. That's the total amount of living tissue that is available in an area. So this shows the available tissue for the next organism. There are also number pyramids, showing the number of species that are available or that are found at each trophic level in a certain area. Because each trophic level harvests only about 1/10 the amount of energy from the level below it, it can only support about 1/10 the amount of living tissue. And these, again, are averages. These are not exact amounts. So here we have a biomass pyramid, how much biomass is actually available at each level. So you can see the producers, primary producers, and then these are the primary or first order consumers, secondary consumers, and the tertiary consumers or third order consumers. And you can see that the amount of kilocalories per square meter get less and less and less available energy. because of course bears don't, well, never mind. I'm not going to go into that right now. Another way to look at it, again, all the energy starts with the sun, moving up from through the producers, consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, the top carnivores, and then these organisms, parasites, scavengers, and decomposers, actually feed at all levels of the food chain. All right, doesn't matter what it is. So these organisms are able to feed anywhere. So here we have a food chain. Now what I want you to think about is who are the producers, who are the primary consumers, who are the secondary consumers. It doesn't matter if you are vegetarian and you are only drinking the milk from the cow, or if you are a carnivore or an omnivore and you are eating the meat from the cow. What level are you at, or what level are humans at in this food chain? If you said secondary consumer, you're correct. So we have our grass, which is our producers. Then we have our cow, which is our first order consumer. And then, of course, we have the humans that are either drinking the milk or eating the cow, which is the second order consumer or secondary consumer. All right. Now, I talked about this before. Energy cannot be recycled. Energy is a one-way flow. We lose energy. Most of it is lost as heat energy. Eventually, we die, we decompose. That energy is then lost to the bacteria. A very small amount gets into the bacteria, but you get the idea. All that energy is eventually lost. Energy cannot be recycled. It's very important that you remember that. Now, energy cannot be recycled. However, the atoms that hold that energy in the bonds are recycled, because if not, we would run out of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen atoms like we talked about before. These cycles are called the water cycle, the nutrient cycle, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle. These are all the ways that our environment recycles all of this material, all of these atoms that we need to build new sugars, new plants, new proteins. So, the carbon cycle is the movement of carbon between the biosphere, the atmosphere, the oceans, and the land, geosphere. Now, basically all the carbon atoms that are in existence right now have been recycled and rotate in our environment throughout history. We have a set number of carbon atoms on the planet, so they need to be recycled. So in other words, the same atoms that are in your body today were countless other atoms, other carbon atoms that they were before, which is pretty crazy. So you may have atoms in your body from somebody else that was living thousands upon thousands of years ago. You have atoms in your body from a tree that was made thousands upon thousands of years ago. You have carbon atoms in your body from dinosaurs. You guys get the idea. When you eat a plant, the same carbon from the wood, which was burnt, can become part of you as well. The carbon cycle is the great natural recycler of carbon atoms. Unfortunately, the extent of the importance is rarely stressed enough. Without proper functioning of the carbon cycle, all aspects of life would be changed dramatically. If we didn't have those carbon atoms, we wouldn't be able to make sugars. No sugars, no energy. You get what I'm saying. So, here's a quick look at the carbon cycle. And when we talk about carbon, we're talking about carbon dioxide, we're talking about sugars, we're talking about anything that has carbon in it. Calcium carbonate, which is that limestone that you see in the middle of your page. So it all gets recycled, and it gets recycled through plants. Plants are the way that we are recycling our carbon atoms. They take the carbon dioxide out of the air, and they turn it back into something that can be used by animals. We eat the animals or eat the plants, and we create those carbon compounds within our body. Eventually, we die, we get broken down back into carbon dioxide, or we exhale that carbon dioxide, or we burn materials, which makes carbon dioxide, which then gets picked up by the plants. You see what I'm saying? This link is good, by the way. I double checked it. If you want to go and check that link out, you can. The water cycle. The water cycle is basically talking about water in its three forms: solid, liquid, and gas. Now, as the water evaporates off the surface of large bodies of water, when you breathe out, you are breathing out air that is 100% humidified. You are adding water to basically the air around you. The oceans are losing thousands upon millions of gallons of water every single minute in evaporation. That water evaporates, goes up into the atmosphere. That water then condenses into clouds, cools, rains, or snows. Water comes back down to the earth, and it's cleaned that way. And this is how we are getting a constant supply of new clean water. It falls onto the land. It refills our aquifers. It refills our streams, our rivers, our lakes, our ponds. The water cycle is continuously recycling hydrogen and oxygen atoms, of course, in this process, which is amazingly important. We are very lucky to live in an area that has a lot of rain. I know a lot of you might disagree with me, but all you have to do is travel to the Southwest, live there for a year, and you will realize how wonderful it is that we have a constant supply of water here, fresh, safe water. Because when you don't have water, you begin to realize how important water is. You can live 3 weeks without food. You can live 3 minutes without oxygen. You can live 3 days without water. So that tells you how important water is. It is the second most important thing behind oxygen. So here's our water cycle. Water is stored in the oceans, evaporation. Evapotranspiration we haven't really talked about yet, but we will talk about when we get to plants, if we get to plants, and talk about how evapotranspiration actually adds water to the atmosphere by plants and their breathing of oxygen out. They also carry water out, just like when you breathe out, you are releasing water as well. That evapotranspiration adds all that water to the atmosphere. Like I said, that water condenses as it cools, creates clouds. Eventually it condenses enough that it rains and or snows. That ends up hitting the land. Most of it ends up back in the oceans, but it refills our groundwater, it refills our freshwater storage, and it also runs back into the ocean to refill the oceans. So that constant cycling of those three types or three forms of water is incredibly important to clean our water with. The nitrogen cycle, of course, when you think about nitrogen, you should be thinking about what kind of compound? There it is, amino acids and also nucleic acids, our DNAs and RNAs. So our amino acids that make up, of course, proteins, super important. Those, and of course, DNA and RNA are very important in making those proteins in your body. Proteins, of course, are found in enzymes, which control all the chemical reactions that happen in your body. So those are all very important. And the nitrogen cycle shows how that nitrogen is recycled in order to get into plants, in order to get into humans, in order to make amino acids, in order to make proteins, etc. What's interesting is the more we learn about comets and asteroids and things like that, and the more we're able to go visit those places with robots, we find that there are amino acids that naturally form in the environment without any help, which is pretty interesting too. That means that amino acids are naturally occurring compounds. They're not just made by life, basically. So here we have the nitrogen cycle. Organic matter, feces, things like that all have nitrogen in them. That nitrogen is all recycled by bacteria. Those bacteria basically turn that nitrogen, in this case it's in the form of ammonia originally, and in feces and urine. That ammonia is actually dangerous to humans and to other animals. However, there are bacteria called nitrites and nitrates that actually recycle those into, they get energy from that and they recycle those into usable nitrogen for plant consumption. The plants use that nitrogen, we then eat the plants, and we get our nitrogen from the plants, also get nitrogen from the animals, etc. And that nitrogen, of course, is found in plant protein. All right. Some of that nitrogen is lost into the atmosphere. Believe it or not, the atmosphere is made up of 78% of nitrogenous gas, which is great. The problem is that we can't get nitrogen from the air. We have to get nitrogen from our food. So it doesn't help us to get that, to have that nitrogen. Luckily, there are bacteria that can also get nitrogen from the atmosphere. Those are known as bacteria fixation process. These are the bacteria down here also go through bacteria fixation. They're just altering those nitrogens to be used. So that's how nitrogen gets recycled in the environment as well. Finally, the oxygen-carbon cycle, basically just going back over the producers that make the oxygen, that use the carbon dioxide, that produced by the consumers, also produced by the decomposers that use the oxygen. This is a constant, basically, cycle of those oxygen-carbon atoms. Carbon dioxide is released by the consumers and the decomposers. Producers need that carbon dioxide in order to make the sugars, which they then release oxygen, which are used by the consumers. Obviously, you can see how this is a constant cycle between the producers and the consumers and the decomposers. That is the end of Ecology Part 2. We will go into specific parts of ecology as well, and you guys will be having activities that go along with this ecology unit. We will be spending the majority of the rest of the year on ecology, so we'll be doing activities. You'll be going outside. Hopefully it won't be snowing anymore like it is today. But you'll be going outside to take a look and count up grass and do activities and things like that that we would normally be doing during school days and during labs. But we will be able to do some of those activities. You will be able to do some of those activities at home. If you haven't subscribed already, please make sure you do. It makes it easier for you to watch these and get through these as well. Again, if you have questions, hit me out in Rind, and hope you're having a good day. See you later.